Another day, another update on Zach LaVine potential trade rumors. This time, Zach LaVine reportedly is open to being traded to the Sacramento Kings to pair with De'Aaron Fox. We got that, plus comments from his agent Rich Paul in the overblownness of Zach LaVine going to the Los Angeles Lakers. We're gonna get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, holding it down for the channel. Make sure you guys are following us at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the content for today. So this one is coming from The Athletic yet again, which has been breaking a lot of kind of the news around Zach LaVine and the trade rumors around the Chicago Bulls. And this time, it's a destination that we haven't really talked about. Even in me and my trade destinations for Zach LaVine, I didn't really talk about this one a lot, even though we heard some rumblings early on, and that this is Zach LaVine would be open and very amenable to a trade to the Sacramento Kings. Now, this also comes after Rich Paul saying that it's not necessarily about Zach LaVine going to the Lakers, which we'll talk about those comments in a while. But in this one is that Zach LaVine will be open to a backcourt pairing with De'Aaron Fox, who he also is a Klutch agent, who also is an athlete on Klutch Sports. So when it comes down to it, hey, Klutch Sports is still doing their thing, which we already know. Klutch Sports is a agency that likes to pair some of their players together when they can, and also they do their market research. And Zach LaVine going to California overall may be the goal here, but pairing him with another Klutch Sports agent, and then on top of that, having him pair in what would be a absolutely dynamic backcourt in the Sacramento Kings could be a very good trade for Zach LaVine. Now, the question of it all is, and something that I've said, is what does that mean for the Chicago Bulls? And we'll talk about that here a little bit in a second. But specifically, when you look at the Kings and why they may be motivated to trade for Zach LaVine, this is a team that right now sits at 5th in the Western Conference with a record of 15-9 and 62% win chance, and they can look to pair Zach LaVine with another dynamic guard in De'Aaron Fox, which would then give them a backcourt. They already got a front court down there as well. They got some questions around the team overall, but this could be a deal that could actually work for both sides. Now, one of the things in looking with the Sacramento Kings as well, they have all their first-round picks outright after 2027. So theoretically, they could trade the 2027, 2029 pick to the Chicago Bulls outright. There are no protection on that from any other team. They could look to include that. We know that the Bulls do want first-round picks back as well for Zach LaVine. So, bam, that checks the box for the Chicago Bulls there. The first-round picks, they are available. And the Kings fit another one of those teams that theoretically aren't usually a free agent destination. And that would make sense, especially when you hear about like the questions around, Zach LaVine and his impact on winning, things like that. Teams that would be willing to really take a risk on that may be the teams that typically don't really get big name free agents. And you also look at what they have, right? Not saying that this will be everything that they'd be willing to offer, but they got Fox, they got Sabonis down there. Those are players that theoretically they're not going to give up in a Zach LaVine trade. You would be theoretically adding Zach LaVine to form a big three in a way there of players that can score, that can fill it up, things like that. You also have Kevin Huerter, right, who right now is their starting shooting guard. And while, no, he does not replace what Zach LaVine brings one for one in any stretch of the imagination, he does bring a $15 million contract that the Bulls could look that could go a long way in matching Zach LaVine's contract. Now, the thing with the Kings is they don't have a lot of high salaries, right? When you look at it, they got Kevin Huerter making $15 million, Harrison Barnes making $17, which those two contracts together get you about $32 million. So that gets you extremely close. They could be willing to part ways with the Harrison Barnes just to make that salary work. I know he's a really big part of their culture down there as well. Harrison Barnes is a player that I like a lot. And, as a role player, he can come in here. I don't think he has a long-term contract either. So the Bulls would not have to be that he has 3 years left on his deal at a fair $17.5 million. So, that's a contract that is much less. It still gives the Bulls a little bit of flexibility. They could look to move him to a third team as well if Harrison Barnes is moved in that deal. But then you also got to look at Malik Monk, who I don't know if they would want to keep Malik Monk with having Zach LaVine down there. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, but that's another player that they could throw in there that would make the salaries theoretically work. in matching Zach LaVine. Now, we would have to send a third player as well, which could be end up Taylor, could be Javon Carter, something like that we can include. Maybe if the Bulls even are willing, if Harrison Barnes included, maybe the Bulls are willing to throw in Torrey Craig, whose contract is little. They can get another player that can kind of replace what Harrison Barnes does, because at that point, they'd really be looking to be a championship-level team. So those are things that could go the route and make a deal work for the Chicago Bulls. Now, I know that there are other players that Bulls fans have talked about and, theoretically on the Kings that they would like and things like that, but I'm kind of just looking at the framework of the deals and the contracts and the way to make that work. So there are other players as well. Davion Mitchell is a player that a lot of Bulls fans have talked about before, potentially being there. His contract's $5 million, so he could, again, be another one of those third pieces in there. If you're looking at Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter being the kind of the baseline pieces there, you could throw in that Davion Mitchell, which we've heard the Bulls be interested in young guards as well, even though kind of don't understand that my place where we have Kobe White going. But again, that's something that you could look at. So the Kings offer an interesting enough standpoint for the Chicago Bulls to kind of look at where they can then go, in the trade scenarios for Zach LaVine. So them entering their names or Zach LaVine being open to being traded there, not that it really matters what Zach LaVine's open to. Let me be clear here. I've said it many times that I want to make sure, even in talking about these trades, that I drill this point home. In a trade for Zach LaVine, it's not about just where Zach wants to go. It's about, period, the Bulls getting back the best assets possible that they can get in a Zach LaVine trade. That is the most important thing that the Chicago Bulls should be looking at in these scenarios, is what gets them the most talent back, or picks, or whatever you're looking for. That should be the first thing. But, we'll say that. So the Kings, now another team on the radar to potentially trade for Zach LaVine. One of the benefits as well from the Kings is that, if I'm not mistaken, all of these players from the Kings that we could possibly talk about are all players that can be moved before January 15th. So this may be a deal that could get done sooner rather than later, if that is the way that it goes. The Bulls probably still want to wait to January 15th to see and listen to all possible deals back. But that's something to look out for. Now, another thing in this article to talk about, and this may be Rich Paul kind of setting the stage for Zach LaVine to go to a team like the Sacramento Kings, or to kind of clear the air before the league starts investigating or anything. But he said this. This is from Rich Paul. It's not one team. I don't have a specific destination for Zach LaVine. I want what's best for Zach and his family. When you have a guy playing the game, you want him to be able to play the game happy, whether that's in Chicago or somewhere else. In the event that the Bulls decide they would like to go a different direction with the team and it involves Zach, then I'm sure we'll have conversations to get clarity on what's best for both sides. Until then, the goal is to get healthy and return ready to go. Now, this is bullshit from Rich Paul. Let me just be clear. One of the things about me having my own platform, away from Locked On, away from a big place like ESPN or anything like that, is I can call bullshit on things. This is a bullshit-ass statement from Rich Paul to say that and put the onus back on the Bulls. This is, again, Rich Paul trying to save face for his client to try to make it seem like it's not us, it's them. And that's the bullshit of this all. Now, here's the thing. It's not surprising that Rich Paul would want to come out and kind of, dissuade from the whole concept of, well, it's just about LA. Again, especially if you're hearing that, hey, the Bulls aren't getting necessarily the best offers, we can end up sending you the $10 fucking two. You want to kind of open it up. But like I said, with everything that's going on, with having another Klutch Sport client there, in De'Aaron Fox, the Sacramento Kings could present themselves as a really good trade partner for Zach LaVine. Is it perfect? Is it what some Bulls fans would want? Not necessarily. I know some Bulls fans are also going to say, well, can we get Keegan Murray back in a trade like this? And the reason why I left Keegan Murray off this is I think you have a young forward down there. I don't think that they look to move on from Keegan Murray and what he's shown from that team. But I tell you what, if you can get Keegan Murray back, if that's not a non-starter for the Sacramento Kings, Keegan Murray is a player that's averaging 15.5 points per game, 6 rebounds, 2 assists basically, and 44% shooting from the field. If you can get that back, hey, that would be one of the better trade possibilities for Zach LaVine as my light dies. But I just don't see the Kings. And again, I always try to present reasonable and realistic deals. I don't think Keegan Murray is a player that the Sacramento Kings would be willing to give up. Now, Harrison Barnes, him being 31 years old, especially if we end up including a Torrey Craig in that deal, is kind of the third piece to make it all work and to open up an additional roster, or the second piece to open up an additional roster spot so we can take 3 players back. That I can see realistically happening. But hey, where do things have happened? Maybe the Bulls can come out of this on the other side of it. It really just depends down to how the Sacramento Kings view Zach LaVine and that pairing with De'Aaron Fox, and they really think that that's a pairing that gets them to the next level of the Western Conference so that they can look to trying to start competing to get to the Western Conference Finals and maybe even the NBA Finals. But let me know what you guys think on all that down below. As always, make sure you're following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.